So let me do a couple of these. Then you can tee it up and we'll play the clip and then we can get into the meat and drink, shall we?
Okay.
This from Bob, who says, this is my Star Wars review. With too little heart and too much reliance on special effects, my review of Sith is best left to Darth Vader when he said, and I quote, "Don't be too proud of this technical terror you've constructed." Tom in Bristol, Star Wars 3, it's shallow, it's dark, it's daft. My 4-year-old says it rocks. All the review you need. Dave Meldrum says, Simon and Mark, Episode 3, a little like Blade Runner, only rubbish. What do you think? That's quite good.
There is a line in Star Wars in which one of the characters says, "This is terrible," and I think perhaps that should be... Anyway, as you were.
This from John Lines, who's in Taunton. This is from a 6-year-old. He says, simply, it's not as good as SpongeBob SquarePants. That's from Alex.
God bless the youth of today.
And I think that sums it up nicely. Do you want to set it up? We'll play the clip and then we'll see where we go from there, Mark.
Okay, Star Wars Episode 3, the 6th film, but due to the cyclical production structure, this is Episode 3, and if you haven't got there so far, it's the one that bridges the gap between Attack of the Clones and Star Wars A New Hope, which, as we all remember, is Star Wars 4, not Star Wars 1, and it's the one which covers Anakin Skywalker's conversion to the dark side and the birth of Luke and his sister, who obviously romped through the galaxy in the 70s and 80s. Shall we hear the clip beforehand?
Why not, sir?
Okay, so in this clip, basically, it's what always happens in George Lucas films. People, in this case, Ewan McGregor and Samuel Jackson, stand around and explain the plot.
Anakin did not take to his new assignment with much enthusiasm.
It's very dangerous putting them together. I don't think the boy can handle it. I don't trust him.
With all due respect, Master, is he not the chosen one? Is he not to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force?
So the prophecy says.
A prophecy that misread could have been.
He will not let me down. He never has.
I hope right you are.
All right, so look, firstly, to be completely fair about this ought to be the best of the prequels, and it is the best of the prequels. That's not admittedly saying an awful amount, considering that Phantom Menace was one of the worst films ever made, ever. And Attack of the Clones was better than Phantom Menace, but so is, slamming your hand in the car door. It's really not such a big thing to say it's one of the best of the prequels. It is the best of the prequels, but simply by dint of the other ones being really bad. Now, what we have here is potentially a story which ought to be compared with Empire Strikes Back, because Empire Strikes Back, as everyone knows, is the best of the Star Wars movies, and crucially is not directed by George Lucas, but it's the one which has dark subject matter, actually has some kind of thematic substance, actually looks like the plot is going somewhere. And in terms of the creation of Darth Vader, it's interesting that they've kept this back to last, because presumably this is the point at which it's all going to come together, and we're going to understand the dark side, and we're going to understand the weird mystic balance of the Force, and all the loose ends are going to be tied up. Sadly, a couple of problems. Firstly, George Lucas could not direct traffic. George Lucas, like Chris Columbus, the director, as opposed to Christopher Columbus, the man who discovered America.
We got that bit.
Thank you. Is an accountant. He's a bean counter. He's somebody who has absolutely no cinematic understanding whatsoever. If you look back at the one film which people respect, which is American Graffiti. American Graffiti is not well directed. It's very well edited, and it's got a very good choice of a jukebox soundtrack. But the actual direction is completely lumpen. In fact, the best director on the set of that movie was, of course, Ron Howard, who later went on to direct things like The Lightness of Splash and The Great Tension of Apollo 13. George Lucas cannot direct. Moreover, he cannot write. His writing skills are, not even preschool. There are at least 3 occasions in Star Wars 3, Revenge of the Sith, in which characters say, we must move quickly. And you sit there thinking, well, in your own time, George, if you want to move quickly, that would be absolutely fine, because I've been here for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I am really waiting for something to start happening. What you get is the central character played by Hayden Christensen, who is, with the best will in the world, a pretty boy. He doesn't have great dramatic weight, who is meant to come to realise a great guilty loss, a terrible thing's going to happen to him, and so awful is it that he turns over to the dark side. Well, as he goes from being Anakin Skywalker to being Darth Vader, there's a moment when Ewan McGregor walks in and says, I cannot believe that Anakin has killed younglings. And you think, you can't believe it? I've been here for 2 hours and I've seen no evidence of it at all. How on earth did this happen? So, firstly, loads and loads of dogfights, starships, boom, all the stuff that we saw before. Although sadly, since George has now completely pigged out on CGI, you can barely see what's going on screen. I mean, somebody really needs to take his computer away from him and say, George, if you can't do it with plasticine and egg cups, then you can't do it, because you really have no control over the computer. You need to stop doing that. All the acting sequences consist of actors looking at each other and walking around in circles. Now, clearly this is because George has taken on board the criticism that his movies consist of people sitting down and talking to each other, so now people stand up and talk to each other, and they circle round and round and round each other incessantly, whilst saying we must move quickly, but incidentally not doing so. The lightsaber battles. I mean, you know, we had double-ended lightsabers before. Now we've got a machine that's got 4 lightsabers, and yet they are directed by people who do not understand the laws of physics or gravity or indeed good drama. Because there are so many ends to tie up, George finds it impossible to ever give us one fight. We have to have 3 fights intercut in a way which is just absolutely infuriating, because you cannot at any point develop any dramatic tension, because he keeps trying to tie up the other threads. So firstly, from that point of view, just as on a technical piece of storytelling, it's badly written, it's rottenly directed, it is acted by people whose woodenness is, you know, it's like chewing the edge of a table. I mean, it's not their fault, because I think Ewan McGregor is a fine actor, and I think he's doing a fine impression of a finer actor before him. But the fact is, it is impossible to deliver those lines in anything other than that kind of fashion. Now, at least the originals had a sort of pantomime campness to them, and they had a brio, and they had a verve, and there is something in them. I was never a Star Wars fan. I mean, I'll be completely frank about it, but at least there was something in the first Star Wars movie that actually blossomed in the second Star Wars movie, because George said, hey, you know, I can't direct. I'm not going to direct this. It's better if I just sit behind and count the box office, because that's what I do really well. So now you get this movie which takes 2 hours attempting to do a fairly simple transition. It's not that hard. The transition is he's a good guy to whom a bad thing makes him turn to the... I mean, it's really not, but somehow he manages to muff it. He manages to muff it on every single level, so that there's stuff, the screen is full of stuff, and people talk about stuff all the time, but nothing actually happens. Oddly enough, in the middle of it all, we have Ian McDiarmid doing Chancellor Palpatine, who is doing a Hammer horror performance of a bad, wicked, evil, you know, creature. And he's actually rather good. And he's on screen for about 15, 20 minutes, and every minute he's on screen, I think, okay, I can deal with this, because what we have here is the good old cartoon pantomime villain. But for the rest of it, it's just living proof of a franchise run out of control. It also serves nobody, because the destruction of Anakin, both his soul and his body, is too graphic for the younglings, and the rest of the movie is too infantile for anybody over the age of 7. So, as before, Lucas has betrayed the fans who made him famous in the first place by making the Star Wars movies a hit. He's aimed the movie at neither a young nor an old audience. He's demonstrated for the umpty-thrumptieth time that if you put him behind a camera, you will get something that looks like a bad television soap opera, except completely overrun by mad computer graphics. And he has created a 2-hour, 20-minute bore fest, of which 17 and a half minutes are quite good. But it is still, by a long way, the best of the prequels. Well done, George.
On the other hand, Jar Jar Binks only in it for 2 seconds. It's in Hallam in Glasgow. Stoic charisma vacuum becomes vindictive emphysema sufferer, while a beardy bloke discusses trade rules with an aging, grammatically deficient gremlin.
Yeah, and again, trade rules is exactly the thing. It's like, you know, it all comes down to tax, doesn't it? That's what it comes down to. And, you know, tell me that Lucas isn't an accountant, but in fact the whole Star Wars saga is about tax wars.
Pierce Ryan says Revenge of the Sith is better than the other prequels, but then again, so would a big screen version of Changing Rooms. If you like your Yodas green and the Force dark, you'll find a lot to like. Otherwise, it's about as enjoyable as cleaning up the shower after Chewbacca.